Alright, Crimson Desert might be the weirdest game that I've ever played. Before this game came out, I had made a video talking about why I was not that impressed with what was shown from Crimson Desert, and there was a variety of reasons for this. I didn't think the combat looked that great. I didn't think the world looked super interesting. I kind of thought it was just an amalgamation of a bunch of features from other games that I liked, but it wasn't going to do it as well as those games. That's kind of what I thought. And after about 75 hours, maybe a bit more than that, I could honestly say that I was right. Kind of. Because this game is such a mixed bag that I could genuinely be loving it or hating it at any given moment. The highs are really high, but the lows are so damn low. The game clearly is an amalgamation of features seen in other popular games, but with many of them not being as good as the games they took these ideas from. But at the same time, there's also a ton of moments where I was pleasantly surprised in a lot of ways, and that's kind of the disappointing part for me because you could see how much potential is there. Like, there are moments where I felt like I was genuinely lost in the world and enjoying the exploration to its fullest, but then other times where the game's glaring flaws came out to remind me just how piss poor and downright ass some of the game design is. And I'm going to talk about all of these aspects, good and bad, in this video. Now, Crimson Desert has been extremely polarizing to say the least. The haters for this game seem to really hate it, and the glazers for this game are honestly just on a different level. There are levels to this shit. I don't think I've seen meat riding to this degree since Stilgar in Dune Part 2. It's at the point where they will make basic game design, like petting an animal or finding hidden passages, sound like something that's never been done before in gaming. And if you criticize anything, they're gonna hunt you down in the comments like a pack of hyenas and call you a yellow paint gamer or a tourist, even though the game has quite a fair bit of yellow paint in its own right. But I promise you guys, I love open world games. It's my favorite genre, but there's room for both praise and criticism because although I'm having a lot of fun with Crimson Desert, there are quite a few glaring issues that do affect my experience with the game. So, firstly, I want to say that the reviewers and the creators that had early impressions that said that the first 8 to 10 hours of Crimson Desert are bad were lying. Because it's not just the first 8 to 10 hours. I'd go a step further and say that the first 20 ish hours are downright awful. Those first three chapters specifically, though, are some of the worst gaming I've ever had the displeasure of experiencing. I honestly kind of think it was just a massive waste of time for the most part. The game tries to introduce you to some of the mechanics and characters, but it does so through the most mind-numbingly tedious quest design of all time, like sweeping chimneys, chasing around goats and cows, doing Crimson Desert's version of the brain dance from Cyberpunk to watch memories of events, listening to some of the worst written dialogue from fodder NPCs with no personality, and the list just goes on and on and on. This is a prime reason why I say it's important to think for yourself and not just listen to sponsored content creators, because I remember before the release, select creators were invited to play the first few hours of Crimson Desert, and somehow many of these guys were basically saying that it was amazing. We know now that that was just a straight up lie, because if this game was released by Bethesda or Ubisoft, I can guarantee those early impressions would have had a completely fucking different tone. But nonetheless, once you're finished those first three chapters and you get access to the Greymane camp, the game does pick up a bit in terms of quest design and just things to do in general. But in my opinion, for all the good content, there is equal amounts, if not more, absolute dog shit content. There is no shortage of fetch quests and pretty much unlimited bandit camps to liberate. Stuff that a company like Ubisoft gets massive amounts of flack for, and rightfully so. For one, the NPCs and general side characters in this game are almost universally awful, with some of the most basic, uninteresting, cookie cutter characters and dialogue I've seen in a large scale open world game, and they almost just feel like props rather than real people living in this world. Majority of the NPCs just spout the same recycled dialogue at you every time you try to interact, and the stranger quests in this game are just straight up awful. It's always just some fetch quest nonsense. And just they aren't interesting characters that you run into. Like other games you could think of like Skyrim or The Witcher or KCD, like while you're walking, you'll run into interesting characters that have quests for you. In Crimson Desert, this almost never happens. It genuinely has not happened to me once. Like outside of faction or main story, you're not going to run into an interesting side character. And that's a massive flaw in my opinion. And it really, really holds the game back from being on that next level. And unfortunately, no cutscenes are skippable. Yeah, you can kind of fast forward them, but it doesn't prevent you from having to listen to extremely drawn out, dry dialogue and over the top emotes from the NPCs. Like, I'm dead serious when I say that this game's dialogue and cutscenes overstay their welcome way too long, and to the point where it's honestly hard to stay interested because nothing particularly interesting is being said. The immersion level is honestly just not at the place you'd want it to be for a game that's so large and with so many things to do. Most of the content in the game feels like busy work and checklist completion rather than fun activities to fill your playthrough because the game is just too bloated. There's just so many mechanics, menus, checklists, features thrown at you constantly that it just becomes distracting and really gets in the way of the fun parts of the game. Because there are fun parts of the game, there are features and mechanics that are generally cool, but the problem is you have to sort through and sift through all the dog shit ones first before you get to those ones. So it kind of just ends up being like a massive grind. It feels like I'm working a 9 to 5 half the time I'm playing this game. And I'll give a little bit of an example. Like, let's say you see something in the skill tree or something online and you really want to use it. So you search up, what do I have to do to get this? It tells you, do like the Embers quest line or something. So you go to do it and you think that you're doing it. But then after you complete something, guess what? There's more. And now here's another mechanic that you need in order to get that mechanic, and another different feature, and more stuff to complete, and more, and more, and more. So it constantly just feels like you don't make the amount of progress that you should for the amount of time you're investing. And because many of the mechanics in terms of traversal, and generally some of the cooler features on combat and other things are tied to completing faction quests and main quests, it feels like you're just being drip fed essential mechanics and being honeydicked the entire time. Like, hey, you thought completing this quest would give you what you wanted? Nope, fuck off. Here's another step that you have to complete. And it just goes on and on. And when the main story, characters, and world isn't particularly interesting, it makes it hard to keep pushing and progressing. And I find this really ironic because the defenders of this game when it released kept saying, who cares about the writing? It's a sandbox game, dude. Just go and explore and enjoy the adventure. But honestly, that's kind of impossible because the story gets in the way literally all the time. And it's funny because Pearl Abyss kept saying not to expect a great narrative, but if they knew their story was shit, then why did the game insist on having unlimited dialogue and cutscenes everywhere you turn? You literally can't do anything in this game without getting locked into a cutscene or a dialogue sequence. Like, saying to just ignore the story and explore sounds good in theory, but the game doesn't really let you do that, to be honest. Like, when I first got the camp, I decided to try and explore, and it was fun for a hot minute. I was finding hidden areas, treasures, doing puzzles, but venturing too far in any particular direction basically results in getting one-tapped by every enemy and any boss that you come across because you were just simply underleveled. You kind of come to a hard stop, and since you don't have the proper traversal mechanic unlocks to explore the map efficiently, it becomes a really big slogfest. The climbing mechanic is awful, it's borderline useless, your stamina runs out super fast, even after the patch, that it's hard covering ground at all unless you use your horse, which is also super janky and just not a fun way to explore since you're constantly clipping against rocks and trees and being stopped by mountains and stuff to climb. And since the fastest way to either level up or get access to new features is through the main and faction quests, you pretty much can't avoid the story and you end up having to deal with the painful grind of leveling and constantly doing some of the most tedious and boring side quests imaginable. And that's not to mention that there's some content in the map that's essentially locked out if you haven't completed necessary story quests. An example of this is when I was exploring, I found this massive sanctum puzzle. I spent about 30 minutes carrying various objects to locations where they were supposed to be put, just to be told that I didn't yet meet the person needed in order to be able to complete the puzzle. Stuff like this is just extremely frustrating, especially in a game that promotes exploration to the extent that Crimson Desert does. But once you do grind your ass off and get some of the better traversal and combat mechanics unlocked, either through quest lines or leveling, and you have enough money and supplies to survive, the exploration feels so much better and is genuinely really fun and a standout clearly. It's some of the best exploring I've ever done in a video game. But the issue is just that the sheer grind in order to get these things is almost not worth it. Like, for me, it's worth it because I love video games, I love open world games, but I can completely see why someone who's more of a casual would absolutely fucking hate this. And it's funny because one of the big stories before the game's release was an emphasis that there wasn't going to be a classic skill tree grind or having to really grind for anything in general, and the lie detector test determined that that was a lie. Oh, and one thing that I forgot to mention that really pisses me off with Crimson Desert's quest design is when you begin a quest and the game forces you to slowly follow another character on horseback at the speed of a fucking turtle while they spout complete nonsense just for you to get to the location and the character tells you to complete the quest yourself and rides off. Just a complete disregard for the player's time, in my opinion, and this happens so often, especially with the Greymane quest and especially in the war quest at the beginning of, I think it's like chapter 5 or 6. I'm not even kidding that you were literally following a guy on horseback for what feels like 30 minutes. It's ridiculous and just so annoying. Now, another thing that I don't really love about Crimson Desert is its combat. I know a lot of people think this combat is great, and that's fine, but I said this in my other Crimson Desert video, but this type of combat is just not my cup of tea personally. It's not really bad. I wouldn't say it's bad. It's just not my style. I don't really like when games combat loops are just throwing unfathomable amounts of enemies at you while you mash buttons. And obviously people are going to be mad that I said it's button mashing, but that is kind of what it is. You know, like, not to self-glaze. They're going to try and say that it's a skill issue, but I'm pretty good at video games. I've been playing for a long time, and trust me, it's not that. It's just kind of what it is. You know, obviously the combat does become a lot better when you have unlocks and skills and better levels, and it gets more controlled, and once you get the abilities down it can become fun in certain aspects, but I still just feel like there was a ton of missed potential. There isn't a ton of cool physics effects like dismemberment or gore. Most of the enemies are generally just fodder that aren't satisfying to fight against because you kind of just mow through them unless you go to a different area where you're completely under leveled, and then it's like the opposite issue. But yeah, it kind of just becomes a chore rather than a fun power fantasy now when I find enemies on the road or something. I will say though that one caveat here is the boss fights. The combat is so much more satisfying when fighting boss battles because you actually have to prepare. You have to think about how you're going to combine all your abilities and attacks, because the boss fights in this game can be quite difficult and offer a lot of variety and unique challenges. So I will say in terms of combat, it feels like it was more so designed for boss battles rather than, just basic enemy fighting. Now, just to go to the opposite direction, one thing I particularly love in open world games is things like base building, which Crimson Desert clearly has with the Greymane camp, and it's probably my favorite part of the game outside of exploration, I would say. It's extremely detailed, there's a ton of things to build towards that are actually worthwhile. Whether it be sending comrades on missions or doing them yourself, when you get enough at camp activities completed, you are rewarded with pretty much everything you need in terms of, food, income activities, armor, or weapon refining, etc. It's to the point where you don't even really need to go into the town or the city vendors at all, which is awesome. Unfortunately, though, even this aspect suffers from the same things I talked about before with tedious mission design. For example, the recruiting missions are downright terrible. It's essentially just go to random location, find your old comrades, sit through a shitty dialogue sequence, rinse, repeat. And even progressing camp expansion is sometimes locked behind completing main story or other non-Greymane faction quests, which really annoys me because it feels like the game's constantly halting my progress and locking the fun parts of the game behind content I have no interest in. But it is what it is, I guess. But aside from the base and the camp building, the clear highlight of Crimson Desert and what has kept me engaged the most is the exploration and the looting and customization. The map is honestly beautiful. There's so many unique and well-designed points of interest, puzzles, treasures. The map size is insane. The scenery and draw distances are crazy. And all the things you could see on the map basically are able to be traveled to, and it isn't just for show, which is typical in a lot of games like this. There's genuinely, like I said before, so many interesting locations. Some are massive in scale, others are smaller, but they mostly all feel rewarding to explore since you get abyss artifacts for leveling and also some drippy gear for Cliff. I love looking for drip in video games. I love when games let you customize your guy the way you want to, and the gear designs in this game are awesome. There's so many cool options to choose from, and I think the gear dyeing mechanic is something that more games should be doing. It is such a cool mechanic. I hate when games, lock your armor to a specific color. What Crimson Desert did with the gear dyeing is awesome, even though it does suffer from some of the, things that I said before, like having to grind for that mechanic in general. But other than that, I think it's just a great mechanic, and I think more games should do stuff like that. And like I just mentioned, there is a lot of puzzles in Crimson Desert, and I love puzzles. I think Pearl Abyss did a great job with them, whether it be, Abyss Sky puzzles or just puzzles you run into during exploration. You really never see the same one twice, and they all feel extremely rewarding to complete, especially if you don't use any guides. I feel like if you use guides, it kind of defeats the purpose and takes away that satisfaction. But the one thing I will say is I wish the puzzles had cooler loot rewards because some of these are extremely difficult and require legit time and effort. So when you spend time on them and all you end up getting is like an abyss gear, it kind of sucks. I wish each puzzle location also had some cool, unique loot attached to it as well. Like, I remember I did one puzzle where it shows X's on a map and you have to actually go travel to each one individually to see what to do. It literally takes like half an hour to an hour to complete this puzzle, and all you get is an abyss artifact, which is just goofy in my opinion. Now, just to end off, I'm not really going to say much about the main story because most things have been said already, but I do want to say I actually like Cliff as the main playable character. Yes, he's basic, but that's not always really a bad thing, and I think if we were just able to, create your own character, it would have been so much better. Like, you could still even have him be named Cliff and have him voice, but letting the player customize his appearance from the get-go was such an obvious home run to me. I don't know why they didn't do it, and instead you have to play 50 hours just to unlock a barber. Also, side note, Unka and Damien are essentially non-factors, and even though they're technically playable characters, they may as well not even be in the game. I'm not even going to talk to them. I didn't play as them really at all, and I don't care to, and I probably won't. But yeah, overall and in the end, I think Crimson Desert, although it's a good game, it's not great. It's not on that next level. There are things that definitely feel like it is on that next level. Certain features like the exploration, like the map, the draw distances, that type of stuff is definitely on another level. But everything else, there's so many flaws that just bring it down a peg for me. Like, I can't honestly put it up there with the greatest games of all time. No shot, honestly. I think that's crazy, in my opinion. I think anyone comparing this game to the likes of Elden Ring, Skyrim, they're out of their mind. But that said, Pearl Abyss has been patching this game up quite a bit. There is a lot going on behind the scenes. So maybe one day it'll get to that level. I don't know. I don't think the world is dynamic enough really to hit a game level like KCD2 or Skyrim or anything like that. I just don't think it's going to be able to do that. But overall, still a pretty good game. I was right about it in some ways and wrong about it in other ways. If I had to give it a rating, I'd probably give it like a 7.5, maybe an 8. When I'm enjoying it, it's like a 9, 9.5. But when I'm not enjoying it, it's low, dude. It's like a 1, like I said before. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Peace.